grandfather, friend.
Ghalia al-Ghannam, 7 years old, killed when an Israeli missile struck her home.
Hashim Abu Maria, 45 years old, father of 4, human rights worker.
Ayanna Jones, 7 years old, killed in her sleep by Detroit police.
When I see them, I see us.
Harassed, beaten, tortured, dehumanized.
Stopped and frisked, searched at checkpoints.
Administrative detention, youth incarceration. When I see them,
I see us.
From Rikers Island to Ophir Prison.
From Rafat to Chicago.
Lives are being stolen.
Remember them.
We are not statistics. We are not collateral damage. We have names and faces.
Sakia,
Nadim.
Kimani,
Jawahir.
Renisha.
Muhammad.
they burned me alive in Jerusalem.
They gunned me down in Chicago.
They shot our water tanks in Hebron.
They cut off our water in Detroit.
They demolished our homes in the Nakab.
They swallowed our homes in New Orleans.
When I see them, I see us.
They see our wombs as dangerous, label us demographic threats. They sterilize us without our knowledge.
Mark our children as criminal.
We say no to all forms of oppression, in U.S. cities or on Palestine streets.
We respect the uniqueness of our struggles and our varied histories.
When I see them, I see us. Resilient, steadfast, determined, I see who we were meant to be.
Alive, free, liberated.
Mapping out our destiny.
I see hope.
Strength.
Love,
A place where our children can dream.
I see a road.
A partner.
A family.
A world where we can rise and be seen.
So that video was made in 2015, and it was 60 different Black and Palestinian scholars and activists that released it together. Can I just get maybe one person to respond what your reaction to this video was, whether it's the first time you've seen it or not? And you could feel free to unmute.
When I see them, I see us.
All right, sorry guys, trying to switch over.
I see like a continuation of an already interconnected history. And honestly, like the continuation of like Malcolm X's work, Huey Newton, not Huey, and just that there has been a concentrated effort, like a psyop, to separate the two causes of solidarity, but also the Black Panther movement and like the Black liberation movement has always been interconnected to international struggles, and this rise of like nationalism in the US has been trying to separate them from everybody else. But I definitely see like this is a continuing of an old tradition that has been going on for a while.
Yeah, thank you so much, Murad. Yeah, and I think that is something really important that helps us bring this to context. We always talk about how Palestine is at an intersection with oppressed communities and oppressed struggles, and the Black Palestine struggle is just one of those. And we have a long history and relationship as oppressed communities and so many parallels. And it is very scary and very dangerous that this is being threatened very purposefully. But as we continue to do this work, we're going to get into more of the discussion of this today, that we rise above that and see that that is all part of the larger imperialist system that we're up against. So today's class is Palestine as a racial justice issue, both solidarity and intersectionality. This is one of my favorite classes. So unfortunately, we are starting to come to the end of our course. So our next class is going to be anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, and then we're going to end with what now in action. So we're almost at the end of this course. So today we're going to talk just briefly. We want to do just a quick overview of intersectionality and systems of oppression, and then we're going to have we have some really amazing people. I already saw Hudi and I saw David and Justine already on. I think Hudi's on, but I'm not sure. They're going to give us a great discussion today on solidarity and the different networks, and we're going to just continue that for the rest of class. So just for time's sake, I think this is something, if you want to just put it in the chat, and this will help guide our discussion. So the question is, what systems do we think of when thinking about the occupation and genocide of Palestinians? So drop those in the chat. So what other systems of occupation and oppression do you think of? And the second question, do you think that any of these systems intersect to oppress other communities nationally or globally? So I'll combine them and just drop in the chat what other systems of oppression do you see as at the intersect with Palestine? And you can give like a general, you can give a specific, and I'll just read them as you say. Algeria's occupation by the French, South African apartheid, racial profiling, supremacist national narrative, indiscriminate violence, the prison industrial complex, domestic and international military industrial complex, Egyptian home demolitions, the capitalist system of the working class, indigenous genocide in the Americas. So all of those are perfect examples of how the struggle for Palestine is not just one struggle, and it's not unique. It's part of a larger system of oppression that all of our communities are facing. So this actually, someone made like last year, and I just thought it was a very interesting visual. So it actually says Palestine is the intersection of all oppression. A lot of you already mentioned some, but some that maybe didn't come up was oppression of children. Obviously, settler colonialism goes hand in hand with indigenous with the indigenous community, and land theft and ethnic cleansing, as well as the history of genocide in the country that we and the lands that we reside on today. Military occupation, economical and employment oppression, environmental oppression, cultural and religious oppression, linguistic, and then the oppression of people of color. So there's so much that we can get into with this. And I do encourage you guys to kind of use this class as a starter if it's something new to you. We put in a lot of different resources in Google Classroom that I do hope that you could all build off of. So this, just for time's sake, I'm not gonna play the video, but I do, actually, wait, Lemia, do you think it's good to play it? Because I think this is the last one before we start the panel, right? So we'll play just a couple minutes of it, and I'll see when to pause, and then we'll start, because I do want to have the bulk of our time. And yes, I'm looking, someone said the Dakota Access Pipeline, the border, so much. You can get into so much, honestly. We used to be able to do more, but because of time, we had to cut some of this. So we'll watch this for a little bit, and then we will start our discussion.
The genocide of millions of indigenous Americans, the horrors of the Holocaust, racial segregation in apartheid South Africa. Some of the darkest moments in history were only overcome through solidarity, compassion, and a call to action. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., no one is free until we're all free. I'm Annalise Borges, and this is The Stream.
This time round, haven't you noticed that with this issue of Palestine, there's been more unity?
Together, we scream ceasefire now, but also the right of return and land back.
Even if we're at the other side of the world, Palestine will never ever be taken away from our hearts, because Palestine is in our hearts.
That's why we say free, free Palestine. That's why we say Black Lives Matter. That's why we say freedom now. And that's got 20,000 deep
off in the street like we some warriors. My mama.
Nelson Mandela were here today, he would say, free, free Palestine. Free, free.
When I look out on this crowd today, I see warriors.
Israel's war on Gaza has brought the world's attention back to the plight of Palestinians, and their suffering is echoing beyond the Palestinian diaspora and the Muslim world, prompting other communities to trace parallels with their own history and speak out. And some of those voices are joining us today. Shania Maharaj is the vice chairperson of the human rights organization Palestine Solidarity Campaign. She's in Cape Town, South Africa. And Steph Vieira from the NDN Collective, an indigenous-led activist organization, is joining us from Los Angeles. Thank you both so much.
I'm actually going to end it a little early because we have some great people to talk about this with us live today. So we'll pause it there. I do think you should definitely watch the rest of that video as much as you can of it.
Much for
Okay, so Lemmy, do you want to introduce?
Yeah, I got you. So we're gonna have a couple guest speakers for our solidarity panel today. Our first guest speaker is Hudi Peterson Smith, who is part of the Michael Rotner Middle East Fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies.
He's joining.
That's where you're going?
Yes, he's joining right now.
Oh, okay, perfect. He researches the U.S. empire, borders, and migration. Hudi graduated from the Clark University Graduate School of Geography in Massachusetts after completing a dissertation that focused on militarization and sovereignty. He is one of the co-authors and organizers of the 2015 Black Solidarity with Palestine statement, which was signed by over 1,100 Black activists, artists, and scholars. And as someone that took this course last year, I will say this was probably one of my favorite classes, and I am so excited for this panel. Vesma, do you want to move on? Next, we have Justine Tiva, who is an indigenous activist from the Pueblo tribes of Santa Clara, Teseco, and Acoma in New Mexico. Sorry if my pronunciations are not the best. Since joining the Red Nation in 2018, they have held the leadership roles and contributed to various campaigns. Justine is also involved with Red Media. Red Media is the media offshoot of the Red Nation and co-publisher of the Red Deal and the Red Nation podcast. In their activism, Justine emphasizes the interconnectedness of indigenous struggles globally, linking issues from the pueblos of New Mexico to Palestine and highlighting the shared experiences of settler colonialism. So excited to have you here tonight with us, Justine. And then we have David Letwin, who is an American author, educator, and activist with a diverse background in theater and social justice. He serves as a lecturer for arts online at the Mason Groves School of the Arts, Rutgers University, and is co-founder of Jews for Palestinian Right of Return. And as someone who has worked with David Letwin before, I am very excited to see you here tonight. Thank you all for coming out, and I'm excited to see how the panel goes.
I'm honored to be here sharing space with you all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This is an awesome space. Already see it's like an all-star cast going on here.
Thank you guys. I saw Hudi, you joined. Okay, so what we're gonna do for today's class, and we'll do this kind of for the rest of class. We're going to have more of an open discussion. That's why I stopped Zoom the presentation share. So I guess, I know we introduced you all. So we could start with the first question is, how do you define solidarity, as well as intersectionality, if you prefer, and what does that mean and look like to you? And sorry, just wanna make a note, because we have a big group with us tonight. I'm gonna ask if everyone can keep any questions, please drop them in the chat as the discussion goes on, because your question might be answered during the discussion. So put those in the chat, and if there's anything at the end after we go through the questions we have that you still didn't get answered or want to flesh out more, then we could ask you to unmute and ask those. Thank you, guys. See if I could I'm gonna try to spotlight our speakers. And whoever wants to go first, so you guys can just start. I'm gonna just call on you then. Foodie, how about you first?
Sure. Hey everybody. I'm so honored to be here with you all. I got invited to do this program one time and I just keep getting invited back, and it's such a sweet part of my kind of annual life now. So I'm really, really grateful to be here with you all. And I'll say, intersectionality and solidarity, I want to start by making a distinction between the two, because intersectionality, this was a concept developed by Black feminists to describe the reality of different systems of oppression intersecting in the lives of individuals and of communities. And so, Black feminists were using it first to describe the condition of being Black women in the United States who are at the intersection of oppression along the lines of gender and along the lines of racism, which also produces something different. It's not just racism and sexism, but then there's a particular, set of conditions for Black women in particular, right? And that's true for so many different kinds of intersections. We know, I'm sure everybody on this call knows what it means, and you think about what it means to be Black and an immigrant, and a woman, or think about things like sexuality and gender and nationality, and religion, and the ways that we're racialized in terms of religion, things like Islamophobia in this country. So, that reality, it kind of exists whether we think about it or not. I mean, you can be a person of color who's experiencing poverty, and whether you are aware of that or not, I'm going to say it's a reality that shapes your life. Solidarity, on one hand, it recognizes that different groups of people are kind of, that our fates are bound together, but there's something very intentional about it. It's not something that just exists. It's something that you really have to think about and really commit to. So it flows from an understanding, yes, that, I do believe, for example, that the nature of systems of oppression is such that so many of those systems intersect at Palestine, and the oppression of Palestinian people. And that really means that, for example, all kinds of ways of controlling migration and diminishing the rights of refugees and controlling and targeting women and women's fertility, which Israeli colonization is obsessed with, all kinds of racialization and policing. There are people all around the world who are impacted by the kind of Israeli technologies of colonialism, whether they know it or not. Black communities in this country are impacted by policing tactics and weapons developed by the Israelis. Migrants who are trying to access this country face a law that is operated with Israeli technology, right? People may know that or not, but it's a fact. Solidarity is about recognizing that fact and committing to mutual liberation. And for me, first of all, that's just because everybody deserves to be free. I'm for a free Palestine, not because that will result in a free Black America. I think that's true. But I'm just here because Palestinians deserve to be free. Do you know what I mean? And whether Palestinian, folks mobilize for Black Lives Matter or not, I'm going to throw down for Palestine because Palestinians deserve to be free. And that's all there is to it. For what it's worth, that said, Black people will not get free if Palestinians are not free. So our fates are bound together. But that's what those commitments mean to me. And the last thing I'll just say, what I've learned, the kind of, the more I live and the more I kind of practice solidarity, the more I see the importance of relationships in solidarity. You know, like I'm so grateful to be in community with Palestinian folks who can tell me what solidarity with them looks like right now, because there's only so much that I can know that, right? And that requires some trusting relationships, and so that feels like an important commitment when I think about solidarity. Thanks.
Thank you, Hootie. I love that you said the importance of relationships is so important because yeah, we could discuss and read as much as we want, but at the end of the day, are we really putting it into practice? So we always appreciate inviting you. We actually just invited Hootie for again for a February 24th panel on Black and Palestinian solidarity. So I hope you guys could all join that too. So David or Justine, do you want to pick up where Hootie left off? So what does solidarity mean to you and what does it look like to you?
Yeah, I can go. So when I think of solidarity, solidarity comes in many ways, but I feel like one of the most important ways is materially. Um, when the Rosebud Reservation was suffering from a lack of propane and ways to heat their homes during one of the most intense winter blizzards that had killed members of their tribes. The Venezuelan president actually um, helped the reservation by getting them propane to their res. When the Al-Aqsa flood began, the Red Nation um we put all of our effort and energy into our media work because that was our strongest suit. I remember in the beginning there, it was very much a war of media, as we all have seen and know. And I think that solidarity is something that is reciprocal, or it should be actually. It's not always is, but I don't know. I don't know how to explain it because solidarity gets used so often, over and over again. It's like how I sign off on my emails even. I'm like solidarity. But but I've seen so many acts of solidarity, and even one of them, I was with a Palestinian comrade at the National Day of Mourning, which is, Thanksgiving Day in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and he saw a group of settlers walking down the street dressed up as pilgrims. And to me, this is so normalized. Like I'm just like, oh yeah, these stupid settlers. Like I just ignored them. I brushed them off. But to my Palestinian comrade, he ran outside and he started just bashing them about being violent genocidals, telling genociders and telling them happy genocide day, and basically telling them that they're just idiots. Like that was one of the best acts of solidarity I'd ever seen in my life because it was he was standing up for us in a way that we don't even stand up for ourselves. And solidarity comes from a place of love and a place of relationship too. And I think that's where the intersectionality of it all comes in as well, because when he did that, he was coming from a place of understanding that he too is a victim of settler colonialism, not particularly from the United States, but from Israel. But so he knows what the settler colonialist state is to indigenous people. And for the first time, I actually witnessed what in real life, a Palestinian, um, a Palestinian's indigenous experience coming through in real time in the States. And I yeah, I don't know. I'll stop there, but I just feel like there's so many ways that solidarity comes through, whether it be materially, but ultimately it comes from a place of love.
Thanks, Justine. Yes, Casey said in the chat it's reciprocal but not transactional. I like that. David?
Yeah, first of all, it's such an honor to be here with these two folks in particular, the Black Solidarity, the 2015 Black Solidarity Palestine Statement, and the Red Deal were two of the great statements, that narratives that have come out in the last chunk of years. And I'm a better person for having read those things and shared them and tried to get other people to say, yeah, read these. So it's great to be here with the two of you. And it's, I mean, what you guys said was incredible. I mean, Corey, for you, speaking about this distinction between intersectionality and solidarity, that's something I've tried to talk to my students about, that they use it often interchangeably. And you did an incredible job. In fact, I see this is being recorded. Basma, you're going to have to send me the transcript so I can excerpt what Pri said about that and share it with my class, because that was such an excellent explanation of that distinction, right, between solidarity, between solidarity and intersectionality. And Justine, thank you so much for framing it in terms of what is solidarity in action. It's not just an abstraction. It's what are you doing, right? So I don't have a ton to add to either of those outstanding comments. I will just share a couple things, I guess. Positionality obviously is important. All of us benefit from being liberated, but that doesn't mean that all of us experience life the same way. And we don't have to be in solidarity with one another. Solidarity isn't predicated on all of us sharing the exact same life experience. It's shared on both of those things that Corey was talking about, right? Both the idea that people deserve to be liberated, full stop, period. And we're all in this together, despite the differences in our positionality, right? Those things are not mutually exclusive at all. And in fact, the other day at Rutgers, we were having a conversation about a polyed event that we wanted to do. And some of the folks were talking about they wanted to sort of frame it as, we're starved for resources here in America, and we're spending all this money on a genocide. I sort of raised the point about how, well, but in one sense, the bit about resources here is not really the point. The genocide is bad. It doesn't matter if they're starving. It doesn't matter if there were tons of money left over from the genocide to help people in this country. That's not the point. The point is, even if there were plenty of resources, it would still be a crime against humanity what Zionism is doing in Palestine. At the same time, I remember as a youngster, I'm embarrassed to admit, don't let my cap fool you. I'm an old guy. I remember that famous quote from Dr. King, that the Great Society, as he called it, the sort of they were at the time sort of liberal reforms, but reforms nonetheless. He said died on the battle, the killing fields of Vietnam. And what he meant was the money that was going into the Vietnam War had killed, starved all of the money that had been going into these Great Society programs. So that too is a very powerful idea, that people need things, and yet their needs are not being met because money is going to these horrible things in other places. So these things all sort of mix together, right? And I thought you did a really great job of explaining how we should think about those things both separately and together. And Justine, in terms of what does it look like in action, you mentioned material things, which is of course one very important thing. I do a lot of writing, so I always ask myself, how can I use my positionality to write in ways and contribute ideas that might help, in the way that ideas transform thinking to the degree that they do that, right? And so a couple of weeks ago, a few of us organized a statement at Rutgers from Jewish union members that we sent to Mondo, that was published at Mondoweiss, that was entitled "Zionist Hegemony Must End," right? And for me, as I'll put it in the chat here, you folks can take a look at it. This was just published a few days ago. For me, the point of that was to use our Jewish identity for solidarity purposes, right? We can't just snap our fingers and end Zionism. I wish it were so, but I don't have the power to do that. But what we can do is, and this relates, Basma, to what you were talking about, I guess the upcoming episode on anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. We can do everything we can as Jewish people to undermine the lie that calling for a free Palestine from the river to the sea, calling for an end of Zionist terrorism and apartheid and oppression is in any way, shape, or form anti-Semitic. We know it's a fraudulent accusation. We know it's completely bogus. It's weaponized to silence calls for justice. And that's a role that we can play, not because we are the only people who can comment on anti-Semitism. That's not true. But because we are uniquely positioned to weather, to sustain the inevitable pushback that's going to come from undermining that Zionist narrative. And we don't want to displace that effort onto people who are less well positioned to refute that and might suffer much greater consequences than we are going to suffer, right? So to me, when I thought about drafting that piece, it was all based around that idea of, to me, this is one thing we can do for solidarity that, hopefully it's not material in the sense of providing a physical thing, but it is intellectual solidarity. And again, we could have a conversation. How valuable is that? Are ideas as important as material things? And I think the answer is probably sometimes yes, sometimes no. You got to do both, and other things as well. But I guess that's what this discussion made me think about. And I'll just close by saying that when you played that video at the beginning, that to me was also another sort of concretizing of solidarity, that interweaving of these voices all talking about the same thing. That really, I looked at that and went, solidarity. I just saw in front of my eyes that word pop up. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that video. Okay, so I'm gonna go on to the next one, and feel free at any point if either of you, like if anyone, Hudi, David, or Justine, if one of you is talking and you want to make it more, like, feel free to make it more of a conversation between you guys, so it's more free flowing. But I have, okay, so I have a list, but I did see something that was interesting. So I'm gonna, because this wasn't something I planned, but I think it's a good question. So Nidda said it. So do you believe that we can truly have solidarity if we haven't been through certain oppression ourselves? So someone that's saying, like, as an ally, which are kind of going to. And what does that look like for someone who wants to have solidarity and be an ally when they haven't had the same experience, and instead has been the person who has benefited from the system that exploits other marginalized people? And I think I'll tie one of my questions into that to follow up with, because we see a lot of allyship that seems very performative. What's your advice on being a true ally and avoiding that? Anyone can jump in.
I can start because I always kind of get caught up on this question because I just don't know. I feel like if you're like in a position of privilege or benefit from the settler state, um obviously if you're trying to, be a do-gooder on it, it's to be a good ally about it. And then the question so- be- about how so much of today's allyship is performative and how to tell the difference between someone being genuine or performative. It, that question's always hard for me to answer because so much of my focus as an indigenous organizer is torn away from that entirely, because what so much of the settlers within the United States fail to realize is that the United States is a settler state in itself, exactly like how Israel is. Like there's still like a reckoning to be had with the settler state of the United States. There's still like a empty land acknowledgements happening everywhere that we go, everywhere that we are, and yet there's no native people in the room because we have been genocided so brutally. Like we make up less than 2% of the population, and right now our citizenship is being questioned. And native people are being up for deportation because they simply just look brown. And you know as an indigenous organizer, like I don't know how to really answer that except to like can you like tear down the settler state, please? Like, can you facilitate the means for land back? You can help with that. Can you like uplift indigenous nations and tribes? Can you like understand and deconstruct the fact that the United States is the imperialist nation destroying the world? Because what so many liberals end up doing these days is empowering the settler state. How do we improve the United States? Like, how do we make the United States better instead of like full throttle dismantling of it? Like, you know, and same thing, you can look at it through like the Israeli Palestinian lens, and it's like, we actually don't want Israel to exist. We should actually be in a position where we are not justifying its existence and questioning it. And I want that same energy for the United States. And as far as telling who's genuine about their allyship, um it's easy to tell if you're coming from a genuine place. You know, it's easy to tell who really centers themselves and their settlerness, and it shouldn't be. But I don't know. That's always a hard one for me. It really is, because my politics don't center people who come from privilege, and my activism doesn't center the settler.
Thanks, Justine. I appreciate that. David Hudi? It's like
You want to go, David? No, yeah. Thank you for that, Justine. I so appreciate that. This question is so good, and the answer feels a little. I mean, there's some obvious complications, because like this is the I do think, whatever, every place in the world has their problems in term that you know, there's an order of things. There are hierarchies, there are people in power, and there are people who are marginalized, and things are structured to kind of keep it that way. But this place called the United States, I think, is really, they have worked overtime for centuries to perfect a system to really divide people, to really make people feel disempowered. And it's just like this laboratory of getting people to turn against um, communities that are just like them, and to hate ourselves. Like it's like truly nightmarish. And that's why this is the most powerful country in the world. Like, not because like you know, Americans work hard or whatever. It's like they've just done a really good job of of figuring out how to exploit and divide people. All around the world, starting here, starting with the First Nations in this place. So it just makes it a really difficult terrain, and I think that this is especially a difficult moment, to be honest. Like, you know, like, for example, the whole question of the kind of performative allyship and performative activism, even, I don't know, like living in this era that's dominated by like social media, which just sort of, like, it lends itself to performance, actually. Like, I think it's actually really challenging to, and I think that we have to be really creative to actually think about, what does activism, what do the politics of liberation, what do liberation struggles, what does solidarity, what does that look like in our time? I actually think that this is on our generations to kind of reinvent, you know, for this moment, drawing on the amazing histories of resistance, um, you know, that we have, but we've also got our work cut out for us. So I just say that to say, like, this is hard, and if it wasn't hard, like, we would have done this by now. But we haven't, you know, which is a testament to how challenging it is. And I think that those of us who are really committed to the liberation of our communities and of everybody, like, give ourselves, like, knowing how challenging this is, like, give ourselves some grace, you know what I mean? And give grace to our comrades. And that said, of course, there are practices that we can commit to that I think are helpful. And for me, you know, I read Asada Shakur's autobiography, which I read reread all the times. It's so helpful. And she talks about coming into solidarity as a black American woman, coming into solidarity with Puerto Rican folks and with folks indigenous to this place, you know, and how she talks about like her first conversations with indigenous activists. She found herself tripping up on her own words. And she was like, wait a minute, I've never talked to a Native person before. Wait a minute, my quote unquote knowledge of indigenous people is actually informed by like these museum exhibits that I saw at the Museum of Natural History. And she said, you know, I realize that you have to know people on their own terms. You have to know their heroes, you know, their histories. And for me, that's our guiding light. And thankfully, like peoples of the world, we've written our histories, we're putting them out there. But those relationships also really matter too. I'll share a story of like my learning. You know, I was in this a conference actually with Nick Estes, who's from the Red Nation. And I was talking about how long it took for the US to extend US citizenship to indigenous peoples, which didn't happen until the 20th century. And for me, that thinking was informed by the Black American experience which has pursued access to democratic rights via citizenship, right? Which we got through literally the Civil War, and then had to fight for another century just to like be able to vote, right, after the Civil War. And Nick was like, wait a minute, why do we want citizenship? We have our own nations. We don't want to be incorporated into this thing. And I was like, oh, my thinking is informed by Black history. I need to actually understand indigenous histories on their own terms, you know? So, you know, again, there's that kind of like framework or you know, practice of like engaging with folks' history on their own terms. And then the relationship, you know what I mean? Like, I know Nick, and Nick was like, you know, he respects me, and he was like, yeah, but here's where you're wrong. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. And I'm so grateful for that, right? So, and I'll end on that point, actually. So how can you know when something's more performative than genuine? What I'm learning, and I've got, unfortunately, some fresh examples of this, is like when you do approach somebody who claims to be in solidarity and you say, you know what, actually, friend, that you're doing right now is not helpful, and I'm going to ask you to do this. How do they respond? I think that's the question. And the fresh examples in my mind, I'm going to say, are from men who present as very feminist, but when confronted quite generously by women and non-binary folks, got really defensive and frankly joined into, you know, kind of crushing, you know, piling on these folks, you know, on social media and elsewhere. That was their response to being approached. So yeah, I offer that as a kind of cautionary tale. I'm sure that this isn't like some shit to people, you know, but that, I think that's a really good, not only for how we, in our relationships with others, but for ourselves, when we think about our own commitments, it's like, to what extent am I able to put defensiveness aside and actually learn from this and grow? And grow gratefully. Like, what a blessing, actually, to be told how to be in solidarity. Oh my goodness, that's the best thing.
Thanks so much, Jorge. David?
Yeah, both were really excellent ways to reflect on this. I mean, I sort of feel in some sense like sort of coming at it the opposite angle of Justine. I don't feel I'm qualified to talk about what solidarity looks like to people who come from oppressed communities. I feel like they know that, and they can, and as Carice says, they can make that known to you. And then the question is, what do you do when that's made known to you? I think that, to me, sort of hits it on the head. When you are asked to be in solidarity, or when you are confronted about the ways in which you are not showing solidarity through the eyes of the people who are actually asking for that solidarity, how do you respond? Do you go, I mean, and I think the way you put it was great. It's fortunate to be given that information, fortunate to have somebody say to you, this is how to be in solidarity. I take it that's what people mean when they say, I mean, we haven't really defined performative. I mean, in my classes, like every time we discuss something, I just start by going over definitions. What do these words even mean in the first place? We often use words and people don't, if you ask somebody, are you confused as to what that word means? They go, no, not at all. And then you say, well, what does it mean? And they can't define it, so which is not a bad thing. We use words all the time very confidently that if we're actually asked to define them, we probably couldn't do it. But to me, I take performative to mean pretense, that you are pretending to believe in certain things or stand up for certain things. But then when either confronted or when the shit hits the fan, you run away from it. That's what I say. Maybe there are other ways of thinking about it, but that's what I think what I mean when I use it. Like you're claiming you believe in that stuff, but you don't really. I'm just, again, trying to think of it in terms of my own experiences. We've had a lot of that go on now as the pushback on campuses is getting even more intense. People's anxieties and fears are coming out of the woodwork, and people, so for example, I'm in a faculty for Justice in Palestine chapter, and there are people who signed on to that chapter who, yet when certain demands for divestment were made, found all kinds of reasons to claim that this was not the right thing to do, this was not effective. Mind you, no Palestinians were not saying this. Nobody was telling us, don't do this divestment resolution. No, they had decided it wasn't right for the movement. Well, that to me is getting to the heart of performativeness. Like, I mean, how do you develop an independent sense of what oppressed people want? That doesn't sound right. So that's what I take to mean by performative. And I think one of the ways that I'm trying to think, how have I tried to deal with that as someone of privilege? And I guess I don't want to say easiest, maybe that's not the right word, but one of the most direct ways of doing it, in my opinion, is in the work that I do, in the writing that I do. I try to focus on the voices of others, to always have that be the center point of the work. I'm sometimes suspicious, for example, as a Jewish person, I'll just confess this to folks. I'm often uncomfortable around Jewish solidarity, Palestine solidarity activists who sort of frame it in terms of their Jewishness as sort of a spiritual issue. Or when I hear people, for example, say, what's going on in Palestine contradicts my Jewish values. That kind of talk makes me very uncomfortable. I'm not in the solidarity movement because it contradicts my Jewish values. That has nothing to do with it. And so I'm uncomfortable with that kind of centering of a particular identity that's not persecuted. And I guess there would some people who would vehemently disagree with that. I do not regard white Jewish citizens in the United States as a persecuted group. We're not. When I walk down the street and a cop car drives by, one cop doesn't turn to the other and go, hey, Joe, look at that Jewish guy. To the degree they notice me, the only thought that would come into their head is there's a white guy, right? So I guess that's part of it. Like, and others of you have mentioned this, not centering the person in solidarity, but centering the people that one claims to be in solidarity with. And then as I hear myself say that, I can imagine people are thinking, well, that just all sounds so easy. Like, oh yes, center other people's voices. And I can understand skepticism about that for sure. And maybe that's clearly not the end point, the end of solidarity. But I have found it to be a good beginning point to say, I'm in this not because I woke up one day and said things should be different in Palestine. I'm in this because Palestinians have said this is what we want. That's what animates the solidarity. And so that should be the center point of solidarity. But I also confess there's a lot of this stuff that I've not fully worked out. I don't know the answers to all the stuff. Is it performative that I'm showing up with a keffiyeh? I mean, I don't know, I mean, clearly I went to Trader Joe's the other day, and as I left, I saw a white person walking out wearing a keffiyeh. And I thought, okay, I thought to myself, now that's somebody who's got some nerve. I mean, if they're not doing it just among friends, they're not doing it at brunch with people who agree with them, they're going into Trader Joe's. And I wasn't wearing a keffiyeh that day, but I've been that person too sometimes, walking out in public, and it feels a lot less performative when you're in a situation where you can you can suffer consequences. And that's where I'll end. Maybe another part of this performative thing is that we feel things are performative when we get the sense that the person taking the positions is not either going to suffer any consequences or more importantly, prepared to suffer any consequences for doing it. So maybe that's part of it. How willing are we as privileged people to not only say we agree with these things, but to suffer the consequences for doing it? And it's very interesting, when we put out this statement at Mondoweiss, we circulated it to a bunch of Jewish union members and faculty members, and I'd say like half of the people we circulated to wouldn't sign it. And I don't think it's because they disagreed with it. I think it's because they're scared of the consequence. And again, I'm not even saying that to wag a finger in their faces. Look, all of us have compromised, have given in to our fears, I'm assuming, at some point. I mean, if you ask anybody on this call, have you done the maximum to put yourself at maximum danger? The answer is probably no, but that's not the point. So that's not the way we decide these things. Have you jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge into the East River as a demonstration of your willing, right? But so there's a bunch of different ways of thinking about these things. And again, if I sound a little bit confused, it's because I often do feel confused how to sort these things out, trying to work it out for myself. So I'm looking forward to hearing more from Corey and Justine on this.
I want to bring something up that what you said, David, brought to mind. I was gonna ask a question, but I think it's really interesting. So I don't do sports, I don't do Super Bowl, but obviously I saw the flag that was waved, and I was like, okay, that I can be down with. And there
Oh,
was,
you mean the Palestinian flag that
yeah,
the
when he
dancer had? Yeah,
and the Sudanese flag, but
Sudanese.
so I'm sure everyone, or if not, I'm sure everyone actually saw this. But what I thought was really powerful was I saw an interview afterwards that the man who did it, I know that they said he was detained and there was a question about getting arrested, but he said that when I did it, it's not like, I think it was really powerful that he said, my fear was I'm going to get shot, and he still did it.
Yeah.
So I guess, can you guys talk about that? I think obviously we have to use our positionality. So there's people, we have our privilege and there's still fear. But then the fact that he knew this is my position and this is what might happen to me and he still did it, I think is so powerful and amazed. And like you said, I'm like, is that something I would even do? I think that really it's really an important question. I want to get your thoughts on that, all of you.
Doing something with knowing that there's a danger that you might get shot or killed is like one of the ultimate acts of solidarity, right? I mean, I remember seeing like a meme on the internet of like two hands like this, and both are all bloody and cut up, and it's like one side's Hamas and then the other side oh my God, I'm forgetting the name. But just like it was showing like all these third world warriors coming together in this act of solidarity with what little that they have, with what little um power in global politics that they have, like showing up in that sense of solidarity. It also reminds me of so 10 days before the Al-Aqsa flood happened in 23 in September, 10 days before it happened. I was in Espanola, New Mexico, and there was a Trump supporter named Ryan Martinez who showed up to a rally that the Red Nation was at. And the rally was um around stopping the statue of a conquistador colonizer being put in front of a city building, that the people rose up to say no, that we don't want this. And ultimately the statue ended up not going up. And so we were there rallying. It was more of a celebration because the statue never went up. Muhammad al-Kurd was there, and he gave such like a powerful speech about how he felt like being with us at like being in Tewa territory, being with an indigenous organization, and like also witnessing the violence of the settlers there. And so this character, Ryan Martinez, he shoots Jacob Johns, who is a Hopi and O'odham tribal member, which is like there's also like acts of intertribal solidarity going on there too. But he took a bullet and um he got shot in the torso, but he did that like to protect us. I was the MC that day, and there was another comrade who was speaking on the mic, and he did that because Ryan jumped a wall and was about to charge at us, but without thinking, Jacob Johns got in between the shooter and us, and he took a bullet. And Muhammad Al Kurd actually um followed the children. You know, children in the US are so conditioned to school shootings and stuff, they instinctively knew what to do. And Muhammad Al Kurd actually followed them to where they decided to go to help protect them. But in like those critical moments of like now or never, and like and like, you know, life or death, it's like people's true colors really come through for like what they're about to do. So even the activists who showed the Sudanese and Palestinian flag at the Super Bowl, you know, not knowing if he was gonna be shot or not, like that, he did that. Like, sorry, I had to mute this. He did that, um, and showed his true colors.
Thanks, Justine. Sorry, my 6-year-old is here. Any other? Uri, do you want to comment on that, or David?
No, I want
I know
something
like what Justine
else.
said is really heavy, so I'm still, you know.
You don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that story is always, it's so heavy. And such a, you know, I mean, it is a reminder of kind of like what we're dealing with, you know? And I think that one of the things that, just thinking about this, the whole question of risk, like one of the things that I think, you know, I said earlier that like our generations have to kind of figure out what it means now to be like, what is the struggle, what do the struggles for liberation look like right now in the 21st century? And it's a process that we are collectively learning. And one of the things that I think we're a little further along. But I remember a few years ago there was this kind of sense of like, and even in the past year and a half, you know, with I think a lot of folks in terms of this particular chapter of genocide, you know, in Palestine, I think there's a lot of folks who are like grappling with like, oh wait, like I don't know if I can do this because it requires like me risking something. And it's like, yeah, like I'm just like, there's no way around risking like this system to change it. It requires some risk, you know what I mean? And that can be, and risk can take all kinds of forms. And obviously, yeah, we're talking about kind of ultimate risks of violence, you know, including lethal violence. But risk me, you know, it's like risking, yeah, like what will my parents think about me if I go to this Palestine rally? What if I, you know, will I get in trouble at school? You know, will I get arrested? And what does that mean? And so, you know, that's part of the deal. Actually, it's about to change the world. There's some risk that comes with that. And I'll offer this, you know, we all have to kind of think about, I mean, we're part of a collective struggle, right? And we're accountable to each other. And we're accountable to lots of people. I don't know, we're accountable to our family. You know, I'm a parent. I'm accountable to my kid too. I mean, I'm accountable to the struggle, but I'm accountable to her as well. So I can't actually be out here like risking arrest without without really thinking about that, right?
Right.
And so we all have to kind of do an assessment of what risk looks like right now. Our lives shift, right? Like before I had a kid, I didn't have that particular vulnerability. I was way more I was able to take different kinds of risks. And then I found that since becoming a parent, actually that has afforded me the ability to take other kinds of risks, honestly, you know. I found myself speaking, for example, from the position of a parent, against a lot of horrendous stuff that's being done in this country, in particular in the name of parents' rights, you know, attacks on trans children, for example, and all kinds of things. Um, and that itself is scary to kind of come out publicly as a parent and okay, now people know that I have a kid, and what is that? Does that so there's all kinds of risks. um, you know, we all have to kind of assess what we're ready for. I will say this: when you assess what you're willing to risk, and you with people who got your back, you take those risks, that itself, there's something liberating about that. I mean, I remember the first time I decided, yeah, I'm gonna get arrested, and did it and got arrested with my folks, you know what I mean? And we had a plan to get us out of jail. And we did, you know, and it worked. That was actually powerful. So I'll offer that. I mean, with the risk comes a certain kind of liberation. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Cause to to kind of follow up on like the people who are like risking everything, risking their actual lives, like there have been multiple people who actually like set themselves on fire and took that ultimate sacrifice as well. Or there are people like even thinking of like Luigi Mangione who shot that CEO and now he's up for prison forever, I guess. And they're throwing away the key. Like he did that to send such a strong political message. And it's like though these people are not you know, these are obvious like individual acts of resistance, but you know, I've always kind of been like teetering back and forth between like individualism versus like organizational like acts of activism. But you know, I have my criticisms and critiques on sort of like individualist stuff, but what I will say is like those like lone wolves out there, the like lone warriors out there, they like give like rev fuel to us, to the rest of us who can't take that ultimate sacrifice, who do have to weigh out those options. And it's like, you know, there I feel like people in the movement all have their role, even the ones who are operating on like that sort of like individual lone wolf sort of level. And it really just empowers the masses to sort of like stay driving towards that cause.
Yeah, that the question of risk is a deep one. You know, I remember, you know, when was it? Last fall, sometime when down in one of the rallies in Washington, one of those huge rallies. There were a couple of those huge ones, so there were 50,000 people there. And I remember somebody, a Palestinian, speaking from the stage, who said, "Look, I don't want to hear anybody complaining. You know, I lost my job because of my Palestine work. If you lose your job, and I still remember the words he used, you lose your job, consider yourself fuel for the fire. You know, that's a heavy thing to wrestle with, to think of yourself as fuel for as you know, at least in certain moments, that's your primary identity, is you are fuel to be burned in the fire of the fight for liberation. And yeah, I mean, we all have to consider what that means. What I mean, I can only think about it in terms of myself. I mean, there is a part of me, I think part of the reason I write these statements and sign them is because I want them to come after me. I want to make a big fight about it. There's a part of me that wants to lose my job or have it come to that so that I get some kind of platform to say something. But then I've also thought that too is a sign of privilege, because all it really says, not all it says, but what among the things it says is, on one level, I have the luxury of losing my job and it's not going to be catastrophic for my family. Right. So how do you factor that into that? Is that real risk? in other words? You know, what are the kinds of risks we're willing to take? I mean, I think the other way I think about risk is I hear everything you're saying, Justine. That's a great, this whole lone wolf thing. I really like the way you sort of thought that through, and it made me think about what are the contributions individuals make, you know. But I've often thought consciously to myself, you know, I'd like, you know, if I risk, I'd really like to be a part of something collective that's big, that's a movement that, you know, that has a that, you know, leaves a mark. But as you point out, sometimes individual acts do leave mark. I mean, one of the most courageous things I can remember seeing in my lifetime was I wasn't there obviously, but the video of that guy they call Tank Man. You heard of this guy? And do you remember this was right when I was graduating from college in the 80s. This image of that guy who walked out in the Tiananmen Square uprisings, and he walked out into the middle of the boulevard and stood in front of a line of tanks and refused to move. And it turned out, as far as we know, he wasn't killed right then. They didn't run over him or shoot him. Who knows what happened to him? He's never been located. In fact, no one knows what happened to that guy. But I remember looking at that and thinking at the time, I was in my 20s, like, that is risky. I mean, somebody, you know, confronting literally this beast that represents industrialized militarism, you know, and how many people are prepared to do that. It's not like that produced a wave of tank people who went out and put themselves in front of tanks. I mean, you are looking at rare people who are willing to make those kind of commitments. So it's hard to think these things through. What can be, what is it, what's reasonable to what's reasonable to expect out of others? What should we demand out of others? What's reasonable to expect out of ourselves? What should we demand out of ourselves? And again, always in mind that we're all coming from different positions in the culture with different levels of privilege, and that informs a lot of these decisions. It's an ongoing process for me to sort of think these things through.
Can I say one more thing on this that just along those lines, and also, you know, resonating with what Danielle just put in the chat, and also for kind of a it's something that slightly challenges what I said earlier about it, and maybe a cautionary tale. I'm thinking too, we also have to be, yeah, it's just a plug for like thoughtfulness too. As we take risks, like, you know, when yeah, I guess it comes back to that question about being accountable to a movement. You know what I mean? Like there's an assessment that each of us has to make, but we are part of a collective as well. And I know people, for example, who have, you know, gotten arrested in the past year and a half, kind of recklessly, and then you know, I wouldn't say this outside of a conversation like this. I've never said this publicly, but when our people get arrested, then we have to throw down for legal fees, and I'm like, was this actually the right call? Like, was this the thing that we wanted our collective resources to go to? Actually, like, you in particular, like, are you like, now we're showing up for you, and now we're not talking about Gaza, actually, you know? So there's that. I'll offer a cautionary tale from my own experience, which was in the summer there was a rally. We were having like a teach-in, and these Zionists came and set up next to our teach-in outside to bait us. And I took the bait because one of them was on a megaphone and was like, you know, Palestinians never existed before, you know, I'll give $1,000 to anybody who can prove that Palestinians existed before 1948. And I ran. I didn't walk. I ran to her. I was like, let's pull up a map from 1936 of Palestine. Let's pull up another one, whatever. And afterward, one of my homegirls was like, "Yo, Kari, when you did that, I saw the cops from the corner moving in toward you, and I got really scared." You know what I mean? Like, I know that you got caught up in that, but I was really freaked out. And then we had to intervene and make sure that you didn't get arrested, and then that's a pretext for the cops to come in, you know, like. And I was like, right. So we're kind of assessing risk, but it's not just risk for ourselves, it's actually for all of us, right? And then being mindful again of who's more vulnerable. And this is the last piece. I'm just going to throw this out there because, you know, I do think that these are such difficult times, and in a lot of ways feel like really desperate times. And, you know, here in Boston, we did have, man, this fall actually we had you know, an anti-Zionist Jewish, you know, comrade confront some Zionists at a protest and get shot. And he survived, but it was really hard. And actually, that same week, a veteran set himself on fire in front of the Israeli consulate here, and he died. You know, he passed. And I just want to say, like, I know, you know, like as I said, risk comes with the territory of being an activist. This won't link. So I wish I could say this more elegantly, but I'm just going to say to you all, like on this call, that you matter so much to this struggle, and we actually need you alive. Do you know what I mean? Like it actually really matters. Like we have to value each other. That just feels important because, again, I just think about so many of us at home alone, like scrolling all this horrific stuff, you know, out of Gaza and out of, you know, this place called the United States, and it's so isolating. And yeah, we need each other alive. So I just wanted to say that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, go ahead.
Sorry.
You go ahead, Justine. Please,
No,
go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, in a, I do feel slightly irresponsible for sort of like highlighting the individualism in some of these acts. I do really still have like a level of praise for them, but it should also be like abundantly clear as well that like what can be done individually, um you know, should all like the same amount of energy and effort should be poured into what can be done organizationally and collectively, because like those are like where the long-term wins like actually like come from. And but you know, it's hard not to praise, it's hard not to praise people who really do create these like spontaneous powerful moments that reach so many people at once. But it takes a certain amount of like revolutionary discipline to hold back and to really like mine the collective as well.
Yeah, you know, just thinking of Kari, what you were saying, thinking about some things that I saw down at the encampments at Rutgers in the spring, and these tensions sort of arose that, you know, if you take individual risk, you know, you may feel as if you're risking yourself, but you're also putting other people around you. You may be putting others around you in danger without their consent or agreement or discussion, or and so that then raises other questions of like, and I like the way you framed it, who are you accountable to? Are you is being an activist or is being in solidarity about expressing your feelings? I mean, certainly is on one level for sure, but it's also about being accountable to other people and not making sure that we don't recklessly put others in harm's way. Again, with this idea that you might not suffer the same consequences for your risk taking as somebody 5 feet away from you may suffer 10 times the consequences you did. So these things are they're hard to, they're tricky to negotiate. You know, we often, I know I've been at so many rallies where people feel a drive to do something, to say something, even if it carries great risk with it. But again, echoing what others have said, what ultimately benefits moving forward. And it's not always clear. It's not always easy. It's not always easy to know. It's not always easy to know what acts are going to be the ones that history remembers. You know, people might plan for something you think is going to be really important, but it might be that one individual over there who did something that's what people are talking about for 20 years. So it's very, very difficult. But this has been a very generative conversation for me, at least, be thinking through some of these things. So I appreciate you all.
Yes, agree. I always love this discussion so much, and I appreciate all of you for it. Okay. I don't even know what you wrote, Manad, but I'm gonna read it. To be honest, I'm very conflicted in the ways that we do activism or action when it comes to risk and self-preservation or protection. And I'm not saying I have the answers or know the way, but I can't seem to fully believe we matter on our activism is more valuable long term when Palestinians resist and sacrifice in the ultimate ways. So why should we be more preserved at the heart of the empire when it's the empire killing them? I know Manadi put it as a reflection, but I think that's a really, I guess, important question of and of like what Manad's asking, and then I think I'll build off it to say like, because we're all in unique positions. Like, who do you mention? Like, you have a child now. Like, how can we still be in solidarity with this question on all of our minds?
Yeah, I mean, this question I so appreciate from Manar, like, because it's like the truth is, I mean, when we say like, when I say that y'all's lives matter, I mean, with all due respect and love, like they don't matter like more than somebody in Gaza, like their lives matter too, right? So it's a yeah, that's a fact, and like the fact is, I don't know, we live in this like globally stratified, like nightmarish reality where, yeah, what life looks like here does look quite different than what it looks like in Gaza right now. And I think that there's something I appreciate I just love what Manad wrote. Like I love what you said about having that as a reflection. I, I mean, certainly that resonates with me, and I bet for all of you all, like every day I've been thinking about, yo, damn, what does it mean, right, to be located here? And I think about, maybe this is the same speech you were talking about, David, but at that was like November 4th, 2023 action in DC, Mohammed Al-Hurd, was on the mic at that rally. And he's like, look, I hear you, I guess, when you say you're worried about losing your job, but like my people, like, like, is it really worth your job, if you're going to be silent in the face of this genocide, right? Is that, like, think about what folks in Palestine are sacrificing. And I think that like that's something that, yeah, again, I'm not saying anything new here. I think that I myself, and I'm sure everybody here thinks about that every single day. Um, you know, so I guess the question is, one of the things I think about is, given this location, being located here, we have a responsibility to think about how to be as effective as possible, right? Like, how do we actually, and that's what, for my friends who are my Palestinian friends in Palestine, I think about a conversation I had with one of them where she was just like, yo, what did you do today to change the practices of your government? Like, at the end of the day, that's what it's not about how you feel and how much you love Palestine. Like, what did you do to actually change the practices of your government that is sending the weapons that is holding us down, right? And that, for me, honestly, every night when I go to bed is the measure. That's what I measure my day against. And I think that we need to have a good answer, actually. Like, and so there's all kinds of actions that we can take that, I mean, like, we'll go back to that P word again, performative. Like, there's lots of things that people can do that respectfully are not contributing to that, So it means, yeah, like, part of the responsibility is thinking, how do we be as effective as possible, and make it worth it that I'm located in this place. Right? Like, at the end of the day, it's like kind of earning. We'll never be able to earn, you know what I mean? Like I think about I don't know. I think about the fact that I'm not like detained in a camp right now. That I'm not, that my house is still, it wasn't obliterated. And that's not something to be earned, because that's a right that everybody deserves. But but it feels like recognizing that not everybody has that. It forces a certain responsibility. So that for me, like the R word is big, responsibility, like reflection, like Manad is saying, and then the responsibility that comes with that.
I think one of the other things that's tough is that, like, this question, like, what have you done today, to pressure your government? I mean, that too needs to sort of be figured out, because like you guys, I'm sure I get 15, 20, 30 emails a day from various groups saying, sign this to tell the government not to send arms. But and every time I sign it, there's that little moment where you feel like, look at me, I did something today, I signed this petition. But 3 seconds later, I do ask myself, what good does that do? I mean, is that what it means to pressure the government to sign pre-made petitions that they've heard a billion times and over again? I'm not criticizing those groups, and I'm sure the groups I'm talking about. I'm not criticizing those groups that do those things at all. But I think that gets down to the question is ultimately is like, what are the effective means that we have at our disposal to affect the change that needs to happen? That's really the thing. And it's hard. It's not always obvious. It's obvious what the easy things to do are. Maybe that's what part of this discussion about risk is about. Is that, can we really affect change without actions of great risk? Is it really possible that if just enough people sign petitions from the comfort of their computer, that we will affect the kind of changes we need to see? I mean, I doubt it. I can't believe it's going to be that easy, right? I'm sure most of us feel that way. So then what conclusions do we draw from that? What are the, I mean, I have a gut instinct it's going to require mass amounts of people out in the street, but beyond that, it's not always clear to me what are the things that are going to produce that change that we're talking about.
Thank you. I'm gonna shift. There's a lot of great questions, but I want to shift and go back a little bit because I think this is a really important one and something we didn't touch on today. Aldo asked, last week we discussed how to counter Zionist myths. So he wants to hear your thoughts on how to refute two specific myths that had come up. One is the claim that Zionism serves as a historical basis for reparations for Black folks in the U.S., an argument that was made by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I know we were also talking recently with someone with MLK too. And then the second, the notion that Zionism is some kind of indigenous movement for Jews returning to their ancestral homeland. So we talked about it, but would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, like, first of all, Jews were already in their ancestral homeland when it was Palestine. So, um, the I hate that one so much. It also kind of brings indigeneity to this weird, like, racial, like, place, because to be indigenous isn't exact is it indigeneity is not an ethnicity, it's actually a nationality. It's actually, I'm indigenous because I'm kin to my nations, my nationhoods, and we actually, as our own individual nations, we have our own ways of determining who our people are, who make up that nation. So, and it even goes into like the whole, like, I've heard people like, oh, I'm gonna take a DNA test to find out how much native I am. It's like, like, that's not how it works. We have our own ways of claiming who we are and how we exist. And so, like, so for them to say that, like, um the Zionist project is a project of Jews returning to their homeland, while just completely, like, sidestepping the fact that they're trying to create a Eurocentric ethno-state. Like, that's what they're actually trying to do, because there's already Arab Jews there that aren't allowed in in Israel. So,
I wish I just had Justine with me all the time whenever Zionist says something, just be like, wrong, try again. Yeah, obviously these myths drive me wild. I will say, appreciating, maybe folks have seen Ta-Nehisi Coates' new book, which he was pretty explicit. He wrote in a lot of ways because he was confronted by Palestinians who were like, why did you what do you and he went to Palestine, and he had to kind of revisit that, and I appreciate how publicly he has said something a lot of people don't say publicly, which is I was wrong. But yeah, I just the idea. Well, I hope it's clear to lots of people that no group of people should want to aspire to what the Israeli colonial state has produced. And if you can claim that that's reparations for anything, that's not a kind of reparations, in quotes, that I'm interested in. There's a long-standing history of movements, black movement in this country for reparations that has not sought a nation state, let alone a colonial state. So it's just so wrong in such a and I'll say it is part of there's this kind of Zionist obsession with aligning actually with the Black freedom struggle because of its moral authority, that we have to really reject. The thing about this notion of Israel, the Israeli project being the embodiment of Jewish folks who are indigenous to Palestine, living out their indigeneity. Obviously, Justine handled that. And I would just say too, one thing I think about is indigenous struggle. I think about how relational indigenous struggle is, and the kind of collective indigenous decolonization efforts. So, for example, there are all kinds of gatherings, including gatherings at, that there are UN committees on the question of indigenous folks, right? That indigenous people from around the world participate in. Does Israel participate in those? No. Standing Rock was this site of not only confronting this pipeline in on native land, in Lakota land. It was also ended up being this amazing site of indigenous gathering. Indigenous folks from all around the world gathered at Standing Rock and produced this amazing kind of collective community of resistance and sharing, whatever. Was Israel part of that? No. So Israel's actually not interested in indigenous liberation at all, right? They have no relationship with indigenous struggle and the liberatory struggles, of which there are countless all around the world. It's such a purely rhetorical game. I think it's so thin that it's so offensive, honestly.
Yeah, I think you guys hit it on the head. That's a great point at the end there. I mean, where you show up defines who you are, not what you announce yourself to be. And if you are not at indigenous, movements and actions, if you eschew those, that says everything, right? That says much more than what you claim you're about your indigeneity. Also, again, and I'm not trying to in any way pass myself off as like a scholar on indigeneity, but it does seem to me that we use the term to mean different things, right? I mean, one simplistic version of it is, where are you from? But I take indigeneity to mean something much more than that. A certain kind of set of attitudes about the land, stewardship, views about how things, relationship between people and their environment. And the Israeli society does not embody those notions of indigeneity at all, as far as I can tell. It's an extractive capitalist culture, and even if you are born there, that's a certain kind of, yes, I'm indigenous to this, why I was born here in this year. But I think we mean something much more when we use the term indigeneity. And one other thing that I just wanted to say about this indigenous thing, I read something recently, I forget where it was published, but somebody did a cartoon not a cartoon, what do I mean? Like a graphic, not novel, but a graphic piece, a graphic, maybe 10-page piece on Zionists declaring, suddenly declaring themselves indigenous. And it showed one example they used was a Zionist poster that showed, an Israeli, a Zionist with the accoutrements of, Jewish religion. I forget exactly what he was wearing, sort of locked arm in arm with, this cartoonist idea of what an indigenous person here looks like. The idea being we are the same. But again, that just loops back to what Kuri was saying. Where are Zionists showing up? Who are they identifying with? And in fact, if you look at Zionist literature from 1948 and around that time, they often referred to Palestinians as Red Indians. They knew what their relationship to indigeneity was about. They knew who they were. They related more to Western colonizing going on in other parts of the world. And when Vladimir Jabotinsky wrote The Iron Wall in 1923, 100 years ago, which should be required reading, because he laid it all out, where he said, we are colonizers. They are the colonized. Of course they're going to fight against us. The colonized always, this is his words, the colonized always resist the colonizer. And what was one of the two examples he used? He referred to the Sioux Indians on their rolling plains, right? He didn't identify with them. He identified them as the same as Palestinians explicitly. They knew. So these claims now to indigeneity are so transparent. And the last thing I wanted to say about it is, on one level, it seems to me, the issue isn't where you are from or where you were born. It's what kind of society are you committed to? What kind of society do you build? Or let me put it another way, maybe I overstepped. It's not just where you're born. That obviously may have some that factors into notions of indigeneity. But to me, I want to make clear I'm choosing my words right because I don't want to be misunderstood. Or let me just limit it to the Zionist situation. Even if you allow for the fact, even if you believe some of the narrative that they were to say about Jewish connections to the land, that in no way can ever justify building the kind of state they've built. So notions of indigeneity in that regard are irrelevant to the issue at hand, which is our commitment to toppling a racist settler colonial state. That's it. And the fact of where you were born, whether your DNA traces to this region or that region, cannot be used as a justification for setting up criminal, racist, extractive, exploitative regimes.
One thing I'll add to that about the concept of indigeneity itself is it's actually inherently related to settler colonialism. Like, had settler colonialism never existed, I wouldn't be indigenous. I would be Akume. I would be Tewatoa. I would be Kohayahanu. Like, I would be from my own nations, where I'm from, and and what makes me indigenous is actually my relationship to settler colonialism. I actually don't want to be indigenous. I just want to be Kohayahanu. Like, I just want to be on my ancestral lands with my with my language and amongst my nation. Those are the three things that determine what creates indigenous people in the United States. But ultimately, we are indigenous because of our relationship to settler colonialism. Therefore, if you are a settler, you are the colonizer. You are not the indigenous. If you are settling in an indigenous territory, then you are not indigenous because you're actually on the settler colonial side of the whole equation.
Period. Thanks, Justine. Thank you, all of you.
Can I just jump in with one quick
Yes,
comment that really
please.
makes me think of something that, I think that's true so much around the world, that people's identities are often forged and shaped through the fact of oppression. There are all kinds of ways that people identify, building on what you said, Justine, that it seems to me they probably wouldn't identify that way had it not been for the oppression in the first place. right? That oppression, there's a symbiotic relationship between the oppressor and and identities of the oppressed, because people wouldn't need to identify in certain ways in the beginning if the causes of that oppression didn't force them into fighting to defend things that they shouldn't have to be fighting to defend in the first place, to just be able to have the justice of their lives. Does that sound right, Justine? Am I understanding you correctly?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm also just thinking about like how it took a weird turn into like when they say like Jews are indigenous to Israel, it's because like they claim that Jews is like an ethno religion, which again brings it back to indigeneity is an ethnic identity when it's not. It's actually like bottom line a political identity.
Thank you. So I had a question that was asked earlier too that I think is important just to be more grounding. So how do you, Alex asked this, how do you speak up but not speak for in the institutional context? So like, for example, inviting Indigenous speakers or oppressed community speakers in a way to center, but like what Alex said was that we don't do it enough. So what advice do you have for that question? And this could be for anybody.
I'm sorry. I'm looking for the. Okay, okay, I see one.
You found it? Yeah, it's from Alex. It was at 8:40.
This is always a question that like plagues me because I don't know the answer either. I mean, it it because what you're experiencing in the spaces where there's not indigenous people is just the results of colonization and genocide. Like, we are already like stretched so thin as a people, even within like our own communities and even with like our own communities that we create within the settlement itself. Like, I'm actually in a right now personally, like in my personal life, I moved back to the reservation from the settlement, and when I was living in the settlement, a lot of my activism was centered on border town violence, which in the Red Nation, we define border towns, not those on the international borders, but the settlements that border indigenous reservations, it, wa- he- everywhere, but like here in New Mexico, there's over 23 tribes with large land bases or large, we have a good chunk of space, I feel like, compared to other places across the US. We definitely exist more prominently in population. Um, be with all of our tribes put together. We still have like very small villages and stuff and small nations. But it it's really hard to focus my activism on matters of the settlement when I've taken a shift to focus my activism on matters of my nation and the reservation. Like, there's things that I need to know to like stop genocide. Like, I need to prioritize like learning my language, learning my cultural ways, like being physically present on the land. And I'm coming to a place where that's actually more important to me than being on in the settlement. Going into these places and taking these positions and stuff, and it's just a complicated question, is just what I'm trying to say. um I don't know. I don't know. I mean, really, like I genuinely don't know. It's something that I think about all the time, but thank you for asking. I just had to be honest with how I honestly feel about that question because I do think about it often, but it is very complicated because I don't know, it's redirecting my activism in its whole self also. So I don't know. I just have to be honest with it because it's a lot to think about, and I don't have an answer for it.
I could jump in here a little bit just from my own personal experience, like doing this work. um I always have this really and I think Ronnie and Abir are here that know what I'm talking about. There was this one experience where we were asked by an organization to support a protest in action, and they said, well, we want to center you guys, and they made it like we want you guys to like it's a way to support. But then like longer it came on, like it became a lot of like we were doing a lot of the legwork and we were very tired, and it was becoming like we had to deal with the brunt of it, and it was actually very early on in the genocide. So we were all like internally so drained and so like mentally not there. And I mean we did it, we went through the action, but I think it was really an experience, and where we decided like this is someone we don't think we're going to work with again. And I think like looking in retrospect, and I think that's a way of not being in solidarity with the group that you're working with. You know, we say we want to center, but are you like being very intentional? Am I doing this in the right way that I'm centering them, or am I just putting the burden on them? That's my, 2 cents, and it just what came to mind. But Alex, you did not do that. Alex, I've spoken at the Quaker House, and they're great. So. We're running out on time. If any of you see any comments you want to speak to, but I think I'll ask one question that because I don't see any there. To me, to go to a more positive note, I'm sure that there are many, and I think a little bit was shared today, but would any of you like to share some of your favorite moments in the solidarity space and setting? I guess where solidarity did really shine. I know Justine, you said a really good one, but anything that was very memorable or powerful to any of you?
My number one um was when the Red Nation went to Washington D.C. for that first national march on Palestine. And I will just always remember that speech, but also not just for the Red Nation, but also the other Native organizations there who really like stood up to speak from an indigenous perspective. I remember Nick Tilson. I was tearing up on that video with Al Jazeera earlier. Nick Tilson was there, and he was speaking very powerfully, and he was like, I remember when he like stood up and he was like, um we took the American flag at the Battle of Greasy Grass and we never gave it back. Like it was really hype, but the way that Native people showed up in that moment, it was so powerful. And I, not to toot our own horn, but I gotta say, like I love our speech. I quote it all the time. We really mark how powerful of a moment it was to see hundreds of thousands of people rising up for Palestine for the first time, like ever, like in Washington D.C. And I remember my comrade Demetrius talking about how he remembers just, 5 or 10 people standing in front of the UNM bookstore for Palestine, and all of a sudden he's there at this moment in Washington D.C. and there's hundreds of thousands of people. And we were up there. We got there earlier. We were up there at the front, and gosh, it was an amazing day. And especially after seeing just the absolute carnage that was happening for a month straight, seeing the media reactions to the entire thing, the demoralization, all of it. Everything before and after that just completely demoralizing. But for one moment, for me, it was that. And then also the times, I gotta say too, also the more personal times that I've interacted with our Palestinian comrades, those ones have all been very powerful. Um, there are too many to name actually, but it was, I gotta say though, like learning about Palestine and settler colonialism is what really locked it all in for me as an indigenous activist, way in the beginning when I first began. I haven't been an activist very long, but I joined the Red Nation in the fall of 2018, and then I went to Palestine in 2019. And in between that time when I was learning about Palestine, I didn't understand why the Red Nation was so like gun-ho on solidarity with Palestine. I was like, yeah, like of course, but like I didn't fully understand. But what really drove it home for me was the map of Indian land cessions in the United States, turning Indian land smaller and smaller and smaller into reservations. And then you see the same thing with Israel turning Palestinian land smaller and smaller into Gaza and the West Bank. And that in itself locked it in for me. And Palestinian organizers who organized for years ahead of their time of taking delegations to Palestine, to the West Bank, and showing them like in real life the settler colonial project of Israel and the havoc that it has on the people and the land. But when I went there, it was like entering a time machine. It was like witnessing the levels of it was like witnessing settler colonialism for my people hundreds of years ago, witnessing the most brutal parts of it, witnessing the most like imprisoning, like the border walls, the presence of military, of the IDF, and the way that they use all these different tactics to suffocate and to kill a people. And you know, I remember thinking about comparing the stages of settler colonialism between Palestine and the United States. And it's kind of like the resistance in Palestine to me was like a raging fire that was like very much like going, and the resistance was very powerful. But for here, it's almost like it's embers for us as native people, where there's not flames happening and popping off the way that it is over there, but it's still very much alive, still very hot. And making that connection because of our organization interacting with Palestinian organizations, and witnessing the way that other organizations across the US like came together in this moment to stand up for Palestine, um has been a very powerful example. But Palestine has really curated some of the most powerful and important moments of solidarity that I've ever seen in my life. So thank you, comrades.
You, Justine. Cody, the question was, so if you want to think about it, can you share one of your favorite moments in the solidarity space and what made it so memorable or powerful?
Yeah, I've been trying to think of which.
Oh, you did
no,
hear it.
just
Okay.
there's so many. Do you have anything queued up, David?
Only, I guess the thing that it made the impression on me most recently were the encampments, the courage of these students across the nation, that was something I'll never forget, and know that we will see much more of.
Man, that was so succinct. I'll try to be. I'll try my best to keep it tight. But I've been thinking about this question made me think about 2020 actually, which was like such a wild year. This was like a year of Black-led uprisings, and I'll just share a couple of things from that year. One was these were Black-led uprisings in response to the murders of the police murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. But that, of course, just kind of raised bigger, deeper, more expansive questions of white supremacy and anti-Black racism and structural racism. And one of the really powerful kind of aspects of that year for me was, there were these, well, it was a year that ended up, it's interesting because actually, in terms of kind of policy changes or whatever, we didn't win that. I think we won a lot of things, but like particular policies changing in terms of policing or other, institutional racism. I can't point to like this is like the thing that Black folks won that year in terms of a policy change. But one thing that changed that was so concrete actually was that year so many sports teams, professional sports teams that had these indigenous, these caricatures of indigenous folks as their mascots finally changed. And actually like people fought, like indigenous folks fought for decades to change the name of the Cleveland baseball team and the Washington football team and so many of these teams, and those struggles were so impactful for me actually as I came into an understanding of this country and what it means that this kind of just, well, I don't have to explain, that the like the racism and the kind of dehumanization of that. And for folks fighting for so long to change the name of the Cleveland baseball team and the Washington football team. And then it was actually those years of indigenous, steadfast struggle combining, like intersecting, converging with these huge Black-led uprisings, that combination was what kind of put us over the finish line, made me feel really proud, and similarly, actually in one of these conversations that we had a few years ago with Crystal Tubles, we were talking about the fact that we were talking about actually like the indigenous protests at and I may mispronounce this, but Hesapa in the Black Hills, also known as Mount Rushmore, because the then president and now president again was having like this 4th of July like rally of colonialism. And there was this amazing protest in defense of the Black Hills. And Crystal said, in this conversation, this is well after that protest, she said that those protests were inspired in so many ways actually by Black Lives Matter tearing down Confederate statues, right? It was like tearing down those statues that so embodied colonialism, this felt like a part of that. So again, like a really powerful convergence that was really meaningful to me. The other thing I'll share really quickly, which is a lot quieter and less visible, was, so I'm part of a project called Black for Palestine. And, we started in 2015 in the after, kind of in the wake of the Ferguson uprising, which coincided with the 2014 Israeli bombardment of Gaza, that one. And since 2015, we had been working to build solidarity amongst Black folks here with Palestine. And then the 2020 uprisings happened, or rather the murder of George Floyd happened. And folks may remember, may know that actually George Floyd, he was at a bodega owned by Palestinian folks. That was the place he was when the cops got called and murdered him. And it made for this really complicated conversation, you know what I mean? Like in a lot of, frankly, like I have a lot of like Palestinian and Muslim and Arab friends, and on social media, like I could see their conversations on social media that they were having with their, community members and relatives who were getting defensive about the question of where, of whether it's possible for Palestinians to actually be on the wrong side of something like anti-Blackness, right? And so we actually had this meeting that was like a closed door invite meet. It was online, but and it was folks from Black for Palestine, black folks from Black for Palestine, and then a bunch of our Palestinian fam. And it was just like Palestinian fam listening to us. And it was really wild because Black for Palestine, we brought it into being to build solidarity with Palestine. And then all of a sudden it shifted and we were the ones who needed solidarity. And our Palestinian fam showed up, so that was really, really powerful, really meaningful. And it's one of those things that, it wasn't a performance because nobody could see it. You know what I mean? Like it was a private kind of closed door invite only thing, and it was so impactful. It was so impactful for folks to listen and kind of carry what they heard into those conversations. And those conversations felt actually really important in terms of building long-term building solidarity between our communities and with our communities.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Chloe. I want to thank all of you. I don't want to take up more of your time. I know Aldo just asked a really good question, so maybe if you guys don't mind staying, just to finish that one. But just to close us off, for the discussion, so I can let everyone go. In one phrase, what does a free world look or feel like to you? I know I always ask this, but I love this question.
Communism.
The simplest questions are often sometimes the hardest ones for me to answer. I mean, maybe hopefully a world where, you know, where this is not what our lives have to be about every minute of the day. Where people can live.
I feel like it's a world where nobody is doubting or denying or questioning anybody else's humanity. And I just think about, again, I'm sure folks on this call know what it's like to just be in a place where somebody is like, you're face to face with somebody who believes that you don't deserve to be here. You know what I mean? And like all the energy that goes into just being in that condition, I imagine just like having that energy, like that not being spent on justifying your right to just be present. But yeah, nobody questions anybody else's right to share this place, and to be where folks belong. Yeah.
Thank you all. I really, really, really appreciate it. You taking the time to stay, and I know it's late in the day and to join us. So always love, this is always one of my favorite classes, so we do appreciate it. So if everyone, whoever has to go, we want to thank you. If it's okay with you guys, if you can just answer Aldo's, because it is a good question. If you can stay, if not, whoever has to go, no problem. But Aldo asked, what type of actions or support do you wish allies had taken or shown after the peak of liberation movements that you were involved in most recently? So with BLM and the Black Uprising, Standing Rock and the Indigenous Resistance, and others. What lessons do you think we could learn from those experiences as we might transition into a different stage of Palestinian solidarity? And I would say for all of us.
That is so hard to answer. Like what what's popping into my head, like just thinking about it a lot, is thinking of like political prisoners and their freedom. And even like that, like that's why the Al-Aqsa flood happened in the first place, was to free political prisoners. And even now with Leonard Peltier getting his sentence, I forget the exact legal word it is, but he's not pardoned. he still has these charges. He still has to be under house arrest, which Indian Collective is doing an awesome job of fighting the definition of what home means, and hopefully he will be able to be free within his reservation. But like these like legal battles that like water protectors have faced post no dapple, like these are all legal matters of the settler state, like their rules, their game. And you know I feel like so much of the mess that's made when it comes to indigenous resistance is because of the legal terms of the settlement. And I think that like, even to understand like even just native law, or just even how native existence exists, like it takes such massive amounts of like understanding of the rules of the settlement. And I'm not sure what I'm asking here, but what I do know is that like legally there um are like favors to be asked. Legally there are political prisoners who need to be freed. And like I don't know, just like a lot of this happens legally. I come from a grassroots movement. I don't believe I'll ever have the chops to become a lawyer myself, but I feel like that's like probably one of the biggest like places of support is like navigating how to achieve our goals, like land back and freedom of political prisoners, ending of borders and walls, and all the things we want come from a place of legality. And that's what comes to mind for me.
All this is yeah, this is an excellent question that feels so challenging to answer. And I guess I'll say this, these moments are so powerful and they come in waves. And I wish we all, this is my wish for all of us, is to develop a richer collective consciousness when we're in those kind of waves, to think, to be able to think beyond that wave and think, this is incredible. Let's take this as far as it goes, but is there something we can do now to make sure that there is a lasting impact here? And I don't know there's no prescription, you know, but I wish that we could all ask that question. I actually think, I mean, from the outside, this is very much perspective from the outside. But at Standing Rock, there was a sense. I mean, for Standing Rock, first of all, like there was this unreal depth of indigenous leadership that I think that, I know folks who went, I didn't go to Standing Rock, I know folks who went, and it was so easy to kind of plug into this whole community of activity happening, to like join in the kitchen and cook, to like go, support people doing prayer circles, at the construction site to disrupt it. And when things feel like easy to do, to kind of enter that, what that means is that people have done a ton of work, very hard work, that makes it feel like it's easy, right? And so I think that there was an indigenous leadership that just had a real awareness of what all this was taking to sustain. And frankly, there were folks who wanted to keep camping out, and folks in the Lakota Nation were like, "Yo," they didn't say, I don't know if they said "yo," but they were like, "It's about to get very cold. We know how to handle the cold. I don't know if y'all are going to be, we're actually going to break this down now and send y'all home, and shift, pivot." And I just thought that was so kind of tactically brilliant, and it just took some foresight. It wasn't just the kind of like, let's figure this out day by day. And so I think for all of us, developing that kind of wherewithal to go beyond the day by day. And then, yeah, for some of us who are in certain positions, have certain resources and certain responsibilities. Yeah, what does it mean to have that consciousness with those resources? That is, we should all, it'd be great if we were all thinking in 2020, all right, how do we sustain this? And then if white folks had certain conversation that was like, all right, what is our role to contributing to making sure this is a lasting thing? I think that's really powerful.
I don't have much to, I think I don't have anything to add to that other than to say I thought that was great what both Karine and Justine said. I think that they should have the last word on that. That was good.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. Have a great night. I hope I get to talk to you all soon. I know we're gonna be talking to Foodie soon. I really appreciate it, and thank you all for staying. And I hope to see you all and hope you have a great night.
Thank you, everybody. It was awesome. Great conversation.
Thanks for the great questions and thanks for having us.
Yeah, seriously an honor and a pleasure.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you so much.